have you with us. My name is Henrik Palmgren, and I hope that you are ready for another radio program. We have invited John Hall to join us today, who has written the book A New Breed, Satellite Terrorism in America. He is also joined by Don Raumaker over there, who might pop in with us a little bit later in the program to say a few words in regards to the book and the material that we will be discussing here today. Hall's supposition is that we are faced with a type of terrorism that is unseen, but just as deadly. The U.S. government satellite surveillance systems are a new way for criminals to gain possession not only of people's financial lives, but our most precious resource, our minds. What can we do, and who are these individuals who are trying to control the way that we think, feel, act, and what we do? We are going to talk about the topics of electronic harassment, stalking, and mind control. We're also going to discuss how CIA and NSA technology is being used to track, intimidate, and even read the thoughts of people. As you know, if you've been following this radio show, these are topics that come up often on and off with our guests that we invite. And we're going to go into detail more in terms of this here today. The website that you can check out right away to read more about our guest and the book is satweapons.com, satweapons.com. So check that out for much more information on that. But with that, John Hall, welcome to Red Ice Radio. It's good to have you with us today.
Oh, it's good to be with you. One thing I would like to start off with is when I wrote the book, obviously it's titled Satellite Terrorism in America. What I wrote about was technology that our government has worked on and experiences that I've seen with close friends and patients that have been exposed to this. But after publishing the book, I've had such a public outcry from many European countries, a lot of people from the UK, from China, from India, that I'm almost wishing that I had left the America part out of the title, because this is obviously a global problem.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was actually the first kind of thing I wanted to discuss with you about the obvious fact that this is not only happening in America, it's happening in Europe as well. And I don't know how much you've researched that or how much you bring up in terms of that in the book, John. But what I can say from my point of view right away is that we have something ongoing over here in the European Union now called Project Galileo. This is the EU's new global navigation satellite system. We've bunged out about 3.4 billion euros for this to compete, I guess, in one level with the U.S. global positioning system. It's planned to be up and operational by 2013, obviously to help to spy on us over here as well. And the plans foresee to collect fingerprints, biometric identifiers of visitors and EU citizens, and the system would actually store 19 pieces of sensitive passenger information, including email addresses, telephone numbers, payment details of flight tickets for actually 13 years. Have you heard of this before, John?
I have heard of Project Galileo, and they're doing the same thing here in the United States with our government. There are bills currently that they're trying to get passed to mandate that all of the citizens of the United States carry a biometric identification card. And I'm assuming that that's according to our government, they've already done it in a lot of European countries. Like you said, a card that will be biometric, it will be chipped, and it will have all of your information on it. And fortunately, in our country, there is a large group of people that are fighting this technology and certainly don't want to be labeled with a biometric identification card.
Absolutely. And you know what? Actually, on our website, redicecreations.com today, I just linked up an article with the headline, India to issue all 1.2 billion citizens with biometric ID cards. And they call this pretty much crazy, you know, to issue this amount of biometric cards. We'll see if they're be able to pull it off. We'll see how that goes. But this is obviously in the plans for the whole globe, as it were, right, John?
Well, I think what's happened was when Verichip and Digital Angel and these different companies that were producing implantable microchips came forward, I think all of our governments were expecting that we would be more than willing to line up and have a chip implanted. Well, there was such a public outcry, at least I know here, against human microchipping, which was, I think, their first choice of doing this. When the people came out against it so vehemently, I think they had to go to a plan B. And plan B is to issue something that seems not as intrusive, which would be an identification card. And at least in our country, after 9/11, the fear that they hold over the population here is that this is going to stop, illegal people coming across our borders, especially in Mexico and Canada, that you have to have this card and it's going to ensure our safety. And the government always uses the cloak of our national security to try to pass these types of privacy intrusion measures. And I think they were, after seeing the fight against microchipping, I think the biometric identification card is the next step to forming a one world government, or if you will, a new world order.
So what is happening in terms of the microchip then? Do you think that that's been put on ice for now, and it might be brought back later on when people have acclimatized more to that kind of technology, meaning that they're not going to look for implanting it under our skin to begin with, but they might give us, just as you say, a card or something first, so we get used to the idea, and then later on they might bring that back again. What do you think, John?
Oh, I'm sure that's exactly what the plan is. And if they can convince everyone to take a biometric ID card, then several years down the road, it's very easy to say, well, you may lose this card. It's hard to get. The bureaucracy to replace a stolen or a lost card is so intense. The next best step would be go ahead and just let us put this Verichip in you that will have all of that information and you'll never lose it. It'll be right there in your forearm. I know I've seen the stories from some of the nightclubs in Europe that were allowing their patrons, or putting chips in their patrons so they could have their credit information and you scan to get in. And they've tried doing the same thing here, but there was such a public outcry against it, especially in a country like ours where the majority of the population is still Christian, and the Christian groups really are the ones who came out just vehemently against microchipping. To them, it was the mark of the beast.
Right.
Right. It was revelations come true, and they are really the ones who stopped that. But you're right. Once they get the citizenry used to carrying a biometric ID card, and even our passports right now, in the last several years, contain a chip in them as well. Then the next step will be to convince people that, it's so much better just to have this implanted. That way there's no risk of loss.
Exactly, losing it or whatever. What do you see as the potential risks with that as well? I mean, I think it is, certain sci-fi movies, if we take that angle for a while, if it's, for instance, this iris identification, you'll see people's eyes actually being, plucked out. If it's in the hand, the people's hands get chopped off and things like that. I mean, that's a possibility here, as long as people know where the chip is. If it gets you in through, with a bank account or whatever it might be. What do you think, John?
Oh, I'm sure you'll see that. And especially if the government starts chipping people, it will be in a common place. They'll run you through centers. And it won't be a chip that's put in a myriad of different places. They'll want everyone to have it in the same place. And you're right. You will see, if it's in the forearm, you'll begin seeing dismemberment in order to get someone's credit information, especially the wealthy. If someone is a multimillionaire or a billionaire, and all their credit information is in a chip in their forearm, I'm certain that we will see violent interaction to dismember that person in order to get to their bank account.
John, why don't we just briefly talk a little bit about your background, especially in terms of this subject. I know that you're an anesthesiologist and that you're part of the Mind Science Foundation dedicated to the study of human consciousness. But how did you get involved in spy technology and emerging?
That's a good question. You're right. I am a medical doctor in Texas. I do anesthesiology and chronic pain management. I actually have many close friends and patients that are involved in the intelligence agencies, and knew a little bit about our capability of satellite surveillance in our country already, and then started noticing that on the internet, people blogging about being victimized by it, and then saw it actually happen to several of my patients, and my fiancée began getting victimized by people accessing this technology. That was the true impetus of writing the book, was to disclose basically my ex-fiancee's story of how she was victimized by a private investigative group in San Antonio, Texas, who is accessing this very intrusive type of satellite technology which is ordinarily reserved for government use in times of war.
So, do you know at this point why she was being targeted? Because this is obviously the question that always comes up. I never doubt that these things are going on, but the most curious aspect to me almost is, why are certain people picked, so to speak? What's your take on that, John?
Well, at least in our case here in San Antonio, Texas, the reason for the targeting of her was purely for sexual assault. Now, in the bigger picture of things, I'm on the medical committee with an organization called Freedom from Covert Harassment and Surveillance. This is a human rights group based out of Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States, that has dedicated themselves to fighting this type of technology, and it's given victims a place where they can talk to other victims. We've done studies through Freedom from Covert Harassment and Surveillance, surveys to determine what patterns of victimization are going on, if there are any common threads among victims, and it seems to be random. Most of the victims are women, most of them that have experienced sexual assault, but as far as them being whistleblowers, them being former government agents, or radicals of any type, we're not seeing any trends in that fashion, nor race, nor religion. It appears that, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, there are several former DARPA scientists that I have talked to, that it appears that the government has released access to this technology to certain criminal groups in every state in the U.S., and has basically given them carte blanche to victimize whoever they want, while the government sits back and just take notes on the success. So it's not the government directly, in most cases, that are victimizing these people, but it's a criminal element. And in this case, it was a private investigative group that's owned and operated by a former FBI agent in San Antonio, and his son, who's a former lieutenant colonel with our Department of Defense. So both of them had access to the technology. Both of them had clearances to get access to the technology. Now they're victimizing whoever they want to victimize, or whoever they're hired to victimize, maybe not even realizing that they're part of a larger experiment themselves.
So do you think that we're seeing the initial steps of this, that they're beginning to testing the technology, but they don't do the dirty work themselves, so to speak? They hand it out to someone else?
Well, that's exactly it. And if you look back at some of the original mind control studies from the 50s, 60s, and 70s termed MKUltra, which I'm sure you've heard about.
Yep.
In MKUltra, almost all of the studies were done through front companies. Now, the term for front company now, at least in our country, is agency sterile. An agency sterile operation is one in which the technology is sold or given surreptitiously to criminal groups. So when they do get caught, in such as the case in San Antonio, you're actually catching a private investigative group that's using the technology to victimize people. Well, it's still government technology, and they still got their hands on it, but it's not linked directly back to the NSA or the CIA, although it is their technology. And it appears that there are a certain faction of the public is currently being used as guinea pigs, possibly using this technology on everyone eventually.
So, do you know at this point if there's a specific satellite system that is being used for this purpose alone?
Well, I'm sure there is, and there are other PhDs that have been doing research into this that think it might be a multimodality type of system. Some of it's coming from satellite, possibly some of it is coming from HARP. Certainly, it's easy enough to track someone via their cell phone now. But so their current thinking is that some of the tracking could possibly be getting done through cell phone use or Gwen towers. Some of the behavioral changes can obviously be done using HARP in a broad sense. It's my understanding that HARP cannot be directed very specifically at individuals, but it certainly can broadcast extremely low frequency waves over a large area to incite behavioral changes. And then using satellite for its directed energy component and for its imaging. So
how would it work more specifically? We look at some of the examples of their attempts to, let's say, influence someone, disrupt them. Of course, spy on them is easy these days in terms of cell phones or tapping into microphones and cameras that are on laptop and desktop computers, etc. So we know that that's going on in one sense if they feel so inclined to target somebody. But how about if we talk about the mind control aspects of this? How would you go about explaining that for listeners who might not be familiar, how the technology and basically how the technology is being used to do this and pull this off, John?
Well, the human brain is essentially an electrical system. It operates on a very narrow frequency range, and what they've developed and have been attempting to develop since the 60s is frequency modulation ways to change behavior. And there's several theories of thought on exactly how they're doing this. One is using microwave hearing to control people. In our country, there was a researcher in the 60s named Alan Frey, F-R-E-Y, who noticed that certain individuals around radar installations could tell when the radar came off and on. They would hear popping and crackling in their head. Well, this is called the microwave hearing effect. Now, the Army and most of the other intelligence agencies took advantage of this to figure out how to communicate with people in their head via the microwave auditory effect or the Frey effect. An important document that was released through our Freedom of Information Act was the Army's addendum to the bioeffects of non-lethal weapons, and that came out in 1996. This was a study where they were able to piggyback other waves with the microwave energy directed directly at the skull to cause communication inside one's head. And in their study, they specifically state to imagine the deleterious effects on an enemy combatant when they begin to hear voices in their head that are not their own. This came directly from the Army. They also mentioned the value of this type of effect in a hostage situation where you can communicate with the hostage or the hostages or the hostage takers directly in their head without the other one hearing. And they go on to state how that it can't be recorded, that even with microphones in the ear or microphones on the scalp, that the communicated sound via the microwave auditory effect cannot be recorded. So that's one person that's going to hear what you're broadcasting to them when no one else around them can, which is exactly what we're seeing in these victims. Almost all of the victims are claiming someone's watching me, they're telling me what I'm doing, they're telling me where I'm at, they're telling me my thoughts, and I'm communicating back to them without speaking out loud. Well, if you hear voices in your head that are not your own, that's very obviously harassment. But they mimic your own voice. You know, as we read, any one of us, you hear your own little voice in your head as you read a sentence. Well, if they put a voice in your head that sounds like your own voice, well, then that becomes a artificial thought, an artificial thought. And many people will act on those thoughts, and then you have control.
Absolutely. I'm reminded here as well of the new ad gimmick that I've been testing and using, which also is using, I think, similar or if not, the exact same technology to project ad messages to people that are walking by on the street. I think this was done over in the States. I'm reading as we talk right here now. Are you familiar with that story? Do you remember that, John?
Yes, I am. And actually, the original technology for that started in Japan, and I haven't seen it in person, but I understand that we do have some soft drink vending machines now that, as long as you're in the correct line of sight, they're using a digital silent sound spectrum, DSSS, to where the advertisement is beamed directly into the patron's head when they stand in a certain spot in front of the drink machine.
That's just crazy. So, the obvious thing right there is how to prevent something like that from happening. Okay, granted, if we're aware of it, if it's out there as an ad or something, it's still intrusive, obviously, but then it's at least, in many cases, we can fairly quickly. But this other kind of harassment that you're talking about is much more subtle and much more detrimental and much more terrorizing in that sense. Is there anything we can do to protect us from that kind of technology, John? Well,
at this current time, really, knowledge is your best protection. What's happening in our country, and I'm assuming what's happening in other countries, is when you begin to hear voices in your head and someone's describing your place in your house or what you're doing or what you're thinking, immediately you know you're under some type of surveillance. Well, inevitably what happens is these people voice these complaints to their employer, they voice these complaints to their family, their loved ones. Well, they can't hear it. It's designed for them not to hear. Invariably what happens is the person says, well, I don't hear what you're hearing. It sounds like schizophrenia or delusional disorder. You need to see someone. And it's usually a loved one or an employer that ends up forcing that person in front of a psychiatrist. The psychiatric community has no knowledge of this technology, doesn't check into this technology, and further than that, if you look at MKUltra, most of the original mind control studies were headed up by psychiatrists. Many of the psychiatrists that did the original studies on mind control were presidents of the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychiatric Association the Psychiatric Association of Canada. These were, top-level psychiatrists in educational facilities that were taking CIA funding to progress this type of technology. So invariably what happens, the psychiatrist tells you the same thing that a family member would. I don't hear the voices you're hearing, therefore you're delusional or you're schizophrenic. And then the victim is further victimized by the psychiatric community. After a diagnosis like that, you usually lose your job, your family alienates you. It's a horrible technology. And that's one of the things that I was hoping with the book, the exposure, was to at least educate the psychiatrists that are within the communities that certainly aren't involved at a top-level position of furthering this type of technology, that are really just ignorant of the technology that exists to emulate mental illness.
I want to bring up a case or an incident, accident, or actually murder, if I put it that way. Back in 2004, that happened here in Sweden. Our foreign minister, Anna Lindh, was actually murdered by a guy, Mijalovic, I think it was called. And he, when he was in court afterwards, he says that the reason for him that he attacked our foreign minister was because he was hearing voices in his head that urged him to do so. This is obviously just one case of many, many where we can see the same kind of pattern. We can talk about mind control and how some, it seems, agents are being used. They sometimes they say that they hear the voice of God or something similar, and they can be, in that sense, driven to insanity to actually do something as well. And that's another aspect of this as well, isn't it, John?
It is, and actually what you're referring to is the creation of a Manchurian candidate, is what the term is that has been used globally. And for a great book on that, for people who think that this is conjecture or conspiracy theory, a physician here in Texas that is a close friend, Dr. Colin Ross, MD, wrote a book called The CIA Doctors, that is all based on Freedom of Information material that our government released on MKUltra, where the main goal was to create Manchurian candidates. Now, Manchurian candidate being an individual, like you spoke of, who is not necessarily an agent of the government, but just a normal citizen who can be remotely controlled to perform a deadly task, such as an assassination, and then, in the ideal situation, be reverted back to their original personality and know nothing about what they actually did. So by definition, a Manchurian candidate really is someone who can have multi-personality disorder induced, be put into a remote hypnotic state or a altered personality state to perform an action such as an assassination, then using a remote keyword, a remote electronic signal, or a remote visual clue, be converted back to their real personality, where they will have no knowledge and no memory of why or what they did.
If we look at satellites specifically, and is there anything that you know of in terms of systems that are being used, and if so, how is this being done? I mean, we've talked about kind of ground level stuff now as well, various technologies to project through microwaves, or if the use of cell phones or what have you. But if we talk specifically about satellites, what happens there and what goes on in terms of satellites, John?
Well, most of this technology gets developed at a ground level. The research that goes into it initially is all done on the ground using people that are volunteers. If you look at most of the military studies on microwave hearing, on directed energy, they're legitimate studies, and they are using subjects who have consented to the experimentation. Usually military individuals who really don't have much of a choice. They get offered promotions or offered extra money for volunteering in these experiments. Well, once they're developed on a ground basis and are found to work or have a military usefulness, then they're loaded onto a satellite platform where they can be used in a more widespread use. In writing my book, I spoke to a friend of mine who's two friends, one currently FBI, one's currently in the CIA, basically to ask them, has anybody commercialized this type of technology, the technology to attack with directed energy or to use the microwave hearing effect for mind control? What I was told by my friend in the CIA is that no one has commercialized it to where it can be basically purchased for hire. But he did say that he admitted having directed energy weapons such as ultrasound, particle beam, laser, and microwave energy on our current surveillance satellite platform. But he also said that it is a weapon of war for use abroad in a very narrow context of use. But if you look at the victims, these people are being victimized no matter where they go.
Right.
On a boat, on the ocean, on an airplane, in another country. It follows you everywhere you go. And there's only one technology that can do that, and that's satellite. And I've seen that personally with victims in Texas, where we have taken people onto very remote ranches where there's no cell phone coverage, out into the Gulf of Mexico where there's no cell phone coverage, and they still hear their assailants, and they still get attacked with directed energy. And most of us agree that, short of HARP, that satellite technology would be the only way to do that.
And how would it be possible to, well, this is very difficult, I guess, in that sense, but would it ever be possible for anyone on the outside who isn't experiencing this to actually hear this in some way? I mean, okay, we have to tap into the auditory nerve or something like that, and that's obviously very difficult to do, but would it be possible, do you think, to kind of monitor, or if you will, prove beyond the point, obviously, of the testimony of the person themselves that it's actually happening to them, John?
We're working on that right now, actually. There are two modes of audio harassment that we see. One is the microwave hearing effect, and that is the voices that one hears directly in their head. Now, there's a second mode of audio harassment that we're seeing, and I describe that in the book as ELF wave-based audio harassment. This differs slightly from microwave hearing. These are, and this actually comprises the majority of the complaints. And these are people that are hearing their surveillors in vibrations around them. They'll tell you that I hear these people in running water, in an aquarium pump, in a vent fan, and anything that vibrates and can finish transmitting the sound. And it appears that is extremely low frequency wave based audio that needs a carrier wave once it is on the ground. And these people will describe being in their home, and they'll say, well, I hear them in my bedroom. When I walk to the kitchen, I hear them coming out of the compressor in the refrigerator. When I walk to the bathroom, I hear them coming out of the vent fan or a ceiling fan. The entire home is blanketed in ELF wave audio. That ELF wave audio needs a carrier wave, something that displaces air slightly for that person to hear. That's the one that we're trying to work up a system to record. We've come pretty close. We've actually had some success using gaussimeters, which are designed to pick up ELF waves attached to digital recorders and some very sensitive equipment to pick up the recording. Now, when it is coming in through vibrations in a vent fan, certainly you can put a recorder near the vent fan. The reason you can't record the broadcasted audio is it's in the background of the vibration. So a traditional digital recorder will only pick up the vibrations of the apparatus that it's near and not the transmitted sound that's within the vibrations. But we're trying to pick that up through ELF wave receivers, and we're having some success with that.
I want to ask you a little bit about what you think in terms of using this later on, maybe down the road, on a broader scale, on a broader populace, so to speak. We hear things like Project Bluebeam, for instance. There is even speculation that the spiral up here in close where we are up in Norway, that was also some kind of demonstration of scalar weaponry or potential HARP technology from the IceCat facility up in Norway. And the speculation here goes that this could be used later on down the road in unison with some kind of auditory hallucination technology, if I put it that way, and combine these two, basically portraying, who knows, right? The figure of God in the sky, what have you, and then the speech comes through as well. Speculations on that, John? Do you think that ever will be will they be able to pull such a stunt off? What do you think?
Well, certainly that seems the direction that they're headed with it. If you look at everything that's happening collectively, we've got technology that is obviously designed to control large populations. We've got every government trying to focus on either chipping or biometric identification cards. In our country, one of the things that we never thought we would see with our current administration, they're wanting to control our car companies, control our banks, control our health care, which in the U.S. is unheard of. Everything is going toward a one world government form of government where the population is controlled. Even the Copenhagen meeting that our president went on based on global warming, one of the things that came out of that meeting, at least what was presented to us, that they see the best way to prevent global warming is through depopulation. And if you look at our current administration with Barack Obama, he's created all these czar positions, and most of these people are former eugenicists. Our director of the science czar, John Holdren, has actually written books on depopulation and eugenics, that they feel the world is overpopulated, and he's written books that go in detail on how we can have forced abortion and forced sterility. So, this is not science fiction, this is fact, and it appears that we are looking at technology that's being studied for use in a one world government.
So what you're saying in one way is that they're laying the infrastructure, they're laying down the technology that potentially is going to be used later on to control the small amount of people that potentially are left if their plans actually go through, so to speak.
And actually, I have spoken to a Dr. Robert Duncan, who was a former DARPA scientist who worked on this technology. His take on this is that everyone is already relatively controllable using this technology, that the people being victimized are the subset of the population that are not receptive to the technology. And if he's right, that's a very scary theory, because that's already saying that they already know how to control the majority of the population, that it is the people that they see as a threat because of because it doesn't work on that population, that are the people that are being gang stalked, being attacked, and being made to look delusional so no one listens to them.
Yeah. And what do you think about controlling people more directly then? If we, it's another level to this as well. If we only talked about harassment, that's one area, but how about controlling obviously people's thoughts as well, and obviously even maybe the way people, where they choose to walk, for instance, in one way bypassing the idea of free will and or the fact that we are making choices and so forth, that we can be totally aligned because of incoming signals to our brain, so to speak. Do you think that that's a possibility as well, John?
I think it's already happening. If you look at some of the victims and what they describe and some of their personality changes, including my ex-fiancée, who was totally controlled, as I write in the book, her personality changed overnight. She went from being a non-drinker to drinking near fatal amounts of alcohol, especially after I identified the group that was stalking her and exposing her to this technology. They needed to get rid of her, but obviously couldn't murder her outright after I had already been to the police. So they began controlling her to drink near fatal amounts of alcohol, controlling her by causing her to fall asleep at the wheel of her vehicle. They were, at several occasions, they actually electronically shut down the computer of her car while she was on the highway. That's a very common thing that we've seen. That's been experienced by myself and by Dr. Don Rawmaker when we got into this fight against this technology. Your ECU in your car is electronic, and with bombarded by the right amount of energy, it can make your car shut off. It can make your transmission shift at the wrong time. And in this particular female, after identifying them as her rapist, they actually shut her car down at highway speed on the highway on several occasions, with her having to pull over into the median of the highway emergently to avoid a fatal accident.
Was that with some kind of OnStar system, or did they do that remotely just by knocking out the electronics in the car, or what? Do you know?
That's done remotely just by knocking out the electronics in the car. You do not need OnStar for that to happen, because they're tracking the individual. As long as the individual that's being tracked is in the vehicle, then the vehicle is being tracked as well.
How do they track the individuals then? I mean, in some cases, there's speculation that some people actually have a chip inside of them. But in other cases, we hear stories about the fact that your biometrical signature, so to speak, can be tracked. We can talk about, as you mentioned before, the fact that you have a unique brainwave pattern. But even the way you walk and things like that can also be picked up by various systems that they're trying out now. But in terms of the research that you've done, what's your theory, or what do you know in terms of how they actually track people, John?
We have checked people for implanted microchips for quite some time. Everyone that's victimized by this technology immediately thinks that there has to be a homing beacon or a microchip in them that has to be honed in on to be able to track them. What we're finding, and this is from talking to people who worked on the technology in DARPA, that it is being done with biosensing satellite systems that can sense your body frequency and can actually sense your EEG or brain fingerprint. You know, everyone's EEG is slightly different. It gives off a different ELF wave signature. When you have a thought, electricity goes through the brain. That is how we read an EEG, which we've been able to do for a long time. And it also gives off an ELF wave signature that can be used specifically from person to person. Another former DARPA scientist that worked on this technology told me that what they actually do or can do is transmit a frequency that stays inside your brain or in your body and slowly degrades over time, but they use the transmitted frequency that resonates within the body to do the tracking, along with brain fingerprinting. And you're right, for years we've had optical tracking, which is based on body recognition and facial recognition. So, and that's been around for 20 years. So if you take it a little bit further, it's not really too hard to grasp the concept that everyone has a different brain fingerprint, just like a physical fingerprint.
Do you think that would it be enough to get the records, let's say from a doctor or a hospital, if someone previously had an EEG, for example, or is there another way that they can scan your brain, so to speak, remotely as well? Or because obviously they have to have one of these aspects first. Either they have to know exactly where you're at to hone in and target in on you, or they kind of search for you, if you will, because of the brainwave pattern that you're sending out. But what do you think in terms of that, John?
Oh, the initial targeting, at least what we're seeing in this country, since this technology is being dealt out to criminal elements, or what we're finding is mostly private investigative groups or large international law firms who use private investigators. Once it's dealt out to a community level, those people target whoever they want to target. If they're hired to target somebody, that person becomes the target. If there's somebody they don't like, that person becomes the target. In our case here in San Antonio, it was a woman that they wanted to sexually assault. She became the target. So the initial choosing of the target is not necessarily at random, but it's at the whim of the criminals that have been given access to the technology. Now, once they've been by your house, they've GPSed your house, they hone in on you with the satellite surveillance. And once your EEG is processed remotely, put into the system, then you're followed and messed with wherever you go.
What do you make of other emerging technologies? We can talk a little bit about RFID, but also I'm interested to hear if you've heard about haptic devices before. We can talk about smart houses, for instance, with touch-sensitive walls, or an office building with sensors in the floor, which again actually can recognize by the pattern, the way you walk, who it is who's walking on that.
Yes, I have, and they've actually talked about using that as part of our new green environment in the United States to save energy by putting those kind of systems in the homes, along with remotely controlled thermostats to save energy, where you essentially would really not have any control over your air conditioning or your heating They would be able to use the haptic sensors to be able to tell how many people are in the household, whether they need to set your temperature for you at a certain degree based on the number of members in the home. They've even talked about using the microwave heating effect via satellite to heat up tenement-style housing or low-income apartments using satellite-based microwave heating, where instead of having an air conditioner or a gas-powered or electrical-powered heater, they will actually heat up the individuals in these low-income houses using microwave energy. So
God. That's horrible. I mean, you know about the health effects in terms of microwaves, right?
This is no joke. They have actually researched into using this as a possibility.
Oh my God. Well, there we go. Well, I mean, we see the cell phones being hauled out, so to speak, and used on a daily basis by kids and adults alike, and still the health effects of it is still not pinned down, and there's various reports back and forth all the time seem to be fighting in terms of if it's safe or not to use it. But one thing we do know is that it opens the blood-brain barrier if you talk for too long on a cell phone, which means that all your toxic things in your body pretty much can enter into your brain. So we know that it's not good health-wise to be exposed to microwaves and cell phone radiation. So that's another aspect to all of this as well, that when we get this grid, so to speak, built up around us, we actually get health effects because of it as well, John.
Yeah, I just read an article recently from an individual, and I believe he was in Sweden, worked for one of the cell phone manufacturers. You've probably seen the same article. This individual became so sensitive to electromagnetic energy that
yes.
he moved out into the countryside. He lives in an entirely electronic-free environment, and supposedly can tell even if someone is walking up his steps with a cell phone on. And a lot of the research he has done, and a lot of the research being done through the European Union, is showing very deleterious effects with chronic cell phone use. And the thing I find is very amazing is, while in Europe they're touting a lot of the dangers of having a cell phone, and if you're a male, in your pocket, that it can lower sperm cell counts from the electromagnetic energy being released, brain tumors, acoustic neuromas, eye damage from having it next to your head for too long. But then you look at the studies that are coming out of the United States, they contradict them completely. The companies that are doing these studies, mostly funded by cell phone companies, come out in our country and say, oh no, there's no damage being done at all, there's no risk. But then you look at the European studies, and they say there is. So, that goes back to who really is developing this technology originally, and I think it's stemming mostly from here.
Absolutely. And by the way, the guy's name there that we talked about briefly is Per Segerbäck, if anyone wants to search for that or find out more information about that. And he lives about 75 miles northeast of Stockholm. And I think that in certain areas in Sweden, they have areas basically set up for people who are electronically, allergic, as it were, or they're allergic to radio waves and electronic equipment and things like that. So that's good, at least, that there is a few options out there. But otherwise, beyond that, to me, it seems like they're building a global grid of this as well, because people now these days, they expect global coverage wherever they are in the world, on their cell phone or on their Wi-Fi for their computer, right, John? So that's another area of this as well, that it's a global grid system that is going into place as well.
It's exactly it, and that's, part of the problem is, in Dr. Rawmaker, who's back on with us now, and I have spoken, we've focused a lot on what's going on with our children in this country, and I've also spoke with Dr. Nick Begich, who wrote Angels Don't Play This Harp, about indoctrinating the next generation into having zero privacy. We really see this fight against this technology and the fight against a loss of privacy as our latch-ditch effort. Most of us that are fighting this are in our late 40s, 50s, and 60s. I spoke to Begich about this, and he said, well, the fight really has to end with us, because the kids, I say kids, people 30 and under, they've grew up attached to a cell phone, attached to a computer, putting their entire life on Twitter or Facebook or MySpace. They've never known true privacy. And when you talk to them about, there was a day when you didn't have a cell phone on you all the time. Your car couldn't be tracked, via its OnStar. You didn't want everyone to know who your friends were, what you did that day, when you went to the bathroom, when you went to the beach. People are putting all this information on Facebook, and the kids today really have no concept of what true privacy is.
Yeah.
That leaves it really in our hands to be the last bastion of defense against total loss of privacy, because after we're gone, the current generation, they won't know anything different. They won't even know what to combat.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I think the owner of or the founder of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, went out recently and talked about the days of, I think it was privacy, basically are over, or the rules for what that is now from now on going to be rewritten or something like that. Which is obviously to enforce the statement that you just made, that we're moving into a total different way of dealing with these things, and for kids these days, it's a natural process, just as you say, to share their entire lives on Facebook or whatever. And in most cases, though, at so far, this is the tricky part here as well, because in most cases, I believe the government or corporations or whatever couldn't really care less about you, really. But in certain cases, there are few targeted individuals here and there. But later on down the road, another effect of this as well is that if all this data is being stored and saved as well on servers, and you have backup on various locations, then you can later on go back into the record and dig out all the information on one individual. If you at that point feel that you want to try to understand who they are, or how would we approach this person to make them interested in ABC, whatever, what have you. And that's another area of this as well, that although it might not be used against you right now, it could be a date later on in your life when it's being used against you, right, John?
Well, I'm going to give a shameless plug here for a show that Don Rawmaker and I do. We have a radio show that's Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, called The Control Factor. And it's funny that you bring this topic up, because last Friday we did an entire hour based on the privacy invasion using Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. And a lot of people don't realize is that when Zuckerberg got his initial financing to form Facebook, it came in two phases. The first round of financing came from some computer companies who were pretty well on the up and up and not very threatening. Now, the second phase of financing to create Facebook came from a company called In-Q-Tel. In-Q-Tel is a venture capital company that is owned and operated by our CIA. So, that should tell you something about what's happening to as you said, the information that's being stored on servers. Now, if you look at the privacy statement of Facebook, which most people don't read, you put on all your information, you're anxious to get on and load your pictures and start making friends on Facebook, that you don't truly read the privacy statement. The privacy statement with Facebook clearly states that any blogs you put on there, any pictures you upload into the system, become the property of Facebook and can be used in any fashion they deem necessary. But now it does say that depending on your privacy settings, that can happen. But most people don't pay a lot of attention to their privacy settings, except for only allowing people they choose as friends to come on. But any of the information you put on Facebook can be used in other avenues. At MIT, we even had a professor who did some statistical surveys showing that most people use, and most internet providers and a lot of websites will ask you for the last 4 digits of your Social Security number in the States. The Social Security number is the one identifying number that every American has. Mm-hmm. And it opens up everything: your finances, your personal history, your medical history. Everything's based on your Social Security number. Well, it has 3 numbers, 2 numbers, and then 4 numbers separated by dashes. Well, most websites will ask for your last 4 digits of your Social Security number as an identifier. This professor at MIT showed that by perusing the internet, by doing Google searches, by looking at your Facebook information, by looking at your purchasing information, that if you know the last 4 digits, that with 70% accuracy, based on your birth date on Facebook, the area of the country that you live in based on other information that you've shared about yourself or friends have shared about you, that they can, with 70% accuracy, come up with the rest of the numbers for your complete Social Security number. Well, then that opens up an entire database of government material, health material, financial material on that individual that criminals will be able to access as well.
It's totally crazy. What, by the way, just as a passing, what do you think of Skype? Do you have any ideas about that? Potential funding behind that as well?
No. This is Don.
Hi, Don. Good to talk to you.
And I really enjoyed listening to you guys. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't know that much about Skype. We really haven't delved into it, but I think it's incredible technology, and I'm sure that
someone's listening, probably.
Yeah, based on the fact that we know that they're listening to everything else that we're doing, I'm pretty positive that they're monitoring what you and I are talking about right at this moment. But we can't live in fear. We have to go on with our lives.
Sure.
I don't know if John has told you, but here in San Antonio, where John and I live, actually we live outside of San Antonio, but there is a hotbed of NSA and DOD and CIA and FBI and so forth, and we have actually outed 3 of the major facilities for the NSA in San Antonio, Texas. And one of the facilities that we've outed was an old grocery store. It was a major chain that went bankrupt, and when you drive past it, it's right in a neighborhood, basically in a residential neighborhood. And when you drive past it, it says Southwest Educational Center or Southwest Learning Center or something to that effect. Mm-hmm. But it's not. It has a big fence around it, and it's guarded and key carded and so forth, where you can't get in it. It has a gate and so forth. Well, we, through our research, have found somebody that actually worked in that building as a contractor, and that whole building is a switching system for AT&T, which is the telephone system in the United States, and they monitor every telephone call that goes on through the AT&T system. They monitor it through this NSA facility in San Antonio, Texas. There's about 50,000 square feet of switches that are being monitored consistently. Also, there's about 15,000 square feet that they're monitoring gaming systems.
Xbox Live.
Oh,
really? Huh.
So everything that goes on, and of course they're doing it under the auspice of Homeland Security. They're looking for the boogeyman, so they gives them the right to search all of our. And another thing that we've discovered in this whole process is that every text message or every email that you send is not private. We were growing up in the generation that I'm 54 years old, and growing up in my generation, we lived in a world of privacy. So we were under the assumption, or I was under the assumption forever, that my personal communications were private between myself and the person I'm communicating with. Mm-hmm. In reality, that's not true. That's not the case. If I'm speaking to somebody, you have to have a warrant, basically, to record and to monitor my voice. If I'm in a vocal communication, but every text and every email that you send is being monitored for keywords or whatever, however they monitor them, mm-hmm. and they're absolutely not private.
They get away with it so easy these days under the guise of, just as you say, Don, looking for the boogeyman. Obviously, searching for terrorism has been has a very detrimental effect on all of our privacies as well. I want to ask you guys if you're up for continuing in our member section, doing another segment for us, because I think that this would be a good time to begin to round things up. Don, John, what do you guys say?
Sure.
Absolutely, sure.
All right, excellent. But I do want to give you guys the opportunity, obviously, to mention your websites again and give us out the URL so people can find the radio show that you guys are doing as well. I'd like to hear that program more about Facebook myself as well. And also, John mentioned the title of the book and how people would go about getting a copy of that if they're interested in finding out more and reading more about the research that you guys are doing.
Well, I'll let John tell you about the book, but our radio show is on Republic Broadcast Network. It's RBN, or republicbroadcastnetwork.net, and we're on from 10 to 11 Central Time. And you can, if you go on your computer and you punch up republicbroadcastnetwork.net, click on Listen Live, and the name of our show is The Control Factor. And basically, we do it 5 days a week, and we address everything that we've been talking about today.
Excellent. And yeah, go ahead, John.
The title of my book is A New Breed: Satellite Terrorism in America, and it is currently at Barnes & Noble's, Amazon.com. Can also be ordered directly off of my website, www.satweapons.com, directly from the publisher.
Also, we're going to put it on the RBN online store. They're going to start carrying it for us with the Republic Broadcast Network store. So if you go to the website, you'll be able to click on the online store and be able to purchase the book through there as well.
All right, excellent, guys. A few websites for our listeners out there to check out. I'm going to have these linked up on redicecreations.com as well, so you can click through easily from our site as usual.